Our guest speaker today is an amazing and inspirational woman, Nancy Wiskel, owner of Dan Joyce Clothing. Nancy not only took over Dan Joyce Clothing in 2019, but led the company through a pandemic and even opened a second location. Woo! She has a ton of wisdom to share, so let's give her a warm ChamberAM welcome. Come on up.
Okay, good morning everyone. So this morning I'm going to take you on a little adventure. And that adventure is what it's like to buy a business right before a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. But before we get to that part of the story, I'm going to give you a little bit of my work background. So I've spent the majority of my working career working for Fortune 500 companies, first on their sales teams, but then laterally on their marketing teams. And I know this is not popular for entrepreneurs to say, but I loved my corporate jobs. It afforded me the opportunity to travel a lot because I had first Canada-wide responsibilities and then North America-wide responsibilities. So I got to go to a lot of really great cities, participate in a lot of really great events. But mostly I got to work with really, really smart people. And particularly on the marketing side of the business, because marketing touches everything, particularly when you're doing a new product launch or new product development. I would be sitting on these multifunctional teams. And so I was there with finance, with R&D, with quality control, with supply chain. And I would just sit at these meetings and really absorb all of the knowledge I could that they had, because I was working with experts. And I think it was through sitting on these teams that it gave me the confidence in order to continue on and start a business of my own, or take over a business. But much as I loved my corporate job, I knew that I wasn't going to retire from a large corporation. For a number of reasons. One, I knew that I had kind of gone as high as I was going to. I had climbed the corporate ladder as much as I could. And for me, I'm all about growth. And so the idea of just sort of staying in this same position for years wasn't appealing to me. Also, I was kind of tired of the politics that you get in big companies, as well as constantly changing priorities depending on who our new business director was. And our business, the businesses that I was participating in seemed to have a really revolving door of business directors. So I was, for a number of years, trying to figure out what is that next thing going to be for me. In addition to that, so sort of happening at that same time, I was trying to figure out how can I get back to Peterborough. I lived here about 25 years ago. My parents lived here, they were aging, I wanted to spend more time with them. I also had an amazing group of friends that I really wanted to get back to. So when the opportunity to buy Dan Joyce's Classic Clothing, as it was known there, came along, I jumped at that opportunity. I was familiar with the store because my mother shopped there. I had been to the store a number of times, and there was just something about it that always really, really drew me to that store. And in the back of my mind, it was always just kind of sitting there. I would love to own a store like this one day. So when it finally happened and I bought the store, I still remember the excitement I felt when I had the keys to the store in my hand and walking up to the doors the first time and opening the doors and walking in. And I was like, wow, I did it. This is all mine. And this was in October 2019. In December 2019, the noise about an oncoming pandemic, this virus that was spreading, was gaining more and more, was getting louder and louder because of course in December it had reached into North America. And with each subsequent month, of course that noise was getting louder and of course realizing that something was going to have to be done to stop, to help stop the spread of this virus. So in March 2020, that's when we faced our first lockdown. But to be really honest with you, prior to being ordered to lock down, I had been seriously considering closing down the store just for a few weeks until this pandemic passed through, because my traffic into the store had pretty much gone down to just like a little trickle. I really didn't have anybody coming in the store because my store's demographic was an older female demographic. And if you remember back at the beginning of COVID, it was the older population that was most seriously affected. So my customers did not want to leave their house, so nobody was really coming to the store. So while I was trying to decide if I should close, we were ordered to shut down. So that decision was taken off my plate, and I was thankful for that. And it's really hard to describe what it was like, not only during that first shutdown, but the subsequent shutdown, what it was like being in the building. So of course the building was dark because I was trying to save money on electricity. but there were no people in the store. There was no music, there was no energy, there was no vibrancy. The store was just very quiet and very still. And it wasn't just within the store that it was like this, it was outside the store as well. There was no traffic going by. The street traffic had stopped. Cars weren't going by. I wasn't even really hearing ambulances. So it was very quiet outside the store. It was very quiet inside the store. However, one thing that hadn't slowed down at all was the arrival of all of my spring-summer inventory. Day after day, box after box of inventory was arriving for customers that weren't coming to my store. And also to add on top of that, with apparel, the buying cycle is really long. So it's about an 8-month buying cycle. So the clothes that were arriving had been ordered in August or September in 2019. So that was even before I was owner. So the previous owners had ordered all of this inventory. So I wasn't even really sure what was arriving. I mean, sure, there were purchase orders, but knowing that a top from Dolcezza was arriving didn't really mean anything to me. So I was opening up these boxes of things that I didn't really know how they were fitting into the plan. So to say that things were incredibly stressful at this time is a bit of an understatement. However, as bleak as things seemed, I did realize that I had a particular skill set that I felt was really going to help me through this, again, what I thought was a very short time frame. One of the things that helped me through, I was a new business owner, so I was already in a change mindset. There were things that I wanted to do for the business when I took it over, such as expanding the demographic of the store, starting an online store, tweaking some of the processes, because one of the things that surprised me when I first walked into the office was there was a fax machine. And apparently all of the ordering and bill payments were still done by fax. And I'm like, I think maybe I can modernize this a little bit. So I undertook to do some of these things, and especially with e-commerce. Luckily, I had some experience already setting up an e-commerce store. So within 2 days of our store being shut down, I had an e-commerce store up and running. Now, it wasn't pretty. I only had 20 items on the store, and compare that to now where I have over 2,000. But you know what? It was a start. And back then, even though that sounds really old, back in the day, but it was just 2 years ago, a lot of the labels didn't produce images for an e-commerce store. They didn't have product images. What they had were the lifestyle images that we could put on social media, but that doesn't help when you have a store. So I probably spent the first 2 or 3 weeks, every day, hours on end, just taking pictures of the product on mannequins. And I'm sure most of you here don't have experience dressing and undressing mannequins. They are so finicky and frustrating, and it was quite a job putting all of this together. But it just felt like I was moving forward. Another skill set that I had is I knew that marketing was going to be really, really key at this time, because of course I needed to connect with customers that weren't interested in shopping, that weren't able to come into the store, and some weren't even able to leave their homes. So how do I still connect to my audience during this time? So marketing was going to be really key. And luckily, I had a very strong marketing background. In addition to that, I'm lucky I happen to be very creative when it comes to developing marketing and sales tools. And believe me, I pulled every marketing sales tool out of my tool belt that I possibly could. And it led me to really examining for my business, how was I connecting with customers? What was the biggest avenue for me to reach out? And for me, it was a newsletter. So when I realized that our weekly newsletter was sort of my biggest connection point, I put a lot of effort into revamping that newsletter, trying to make it much more personal. I would include little anecdotes about myself in it. I start my newsletter with a note from Nancy. And I'm a very private person, so for me to put little pieces of myself out there wasn't easy, but I did it, and it's still not easy for me, but it's still something that I do. I would talk about other businesses in downtown, ways that you could support other businesses. I developed a bingo card so that people could play a bingo game with just doing things that that would be easy for them, like going out for a walk. You could get a point, and then you could turn your bingo cards in for a gift card. So I was just trying to connect in a way that didn't rely on people buying from my store. So these were the type of things that I was looking at, that I did do over the 2.5 years that we've been in this situation. And lastly, a skill that I had that I didn't even really realize I had When I worked in the corporate world, I worked for the Canadian division of a very large American company. So we really didn't have any kind of marketing budget for Canada. The Americans just felt, well, we've got all of these tools here, you can use them. But the Canadian market is slightly different, and I did need to change messaging and do different things to attract a Canadian audience. So I was used to building marketing and sales tools on pretty much a zero budget. And let me tell you, marketing on a zero budget is a skill, and luckily I had it developed because that's what I had to do. However, while I felt very confident in the marketing side of my business, and I felt that was a strength for us, inventory was still the hardest thing for me to manage, and I was an inexperienced buyer. On top of that, as I mentioned, we've got about an 8-month lead time before we receive our items. So we're trying to guess, and myself, I'm inexperienced, I'm trying to guess what's going to happen 8 months from now when I'm ordering clothes. And more often than not, I got it wrong. So, I mean, the first year when I said all those items were arriving, I had a lot of like blazers and skirts and things for women to wear to the office. Well, guess what? By the time it arrived, nobody was going to the office and everyone was looking for leisure wear. And also the way that apparel works, when you place your orders, that's when the manufacturers make the orders. So it's not like there's a lot of inventory lying around that I could just call somebody up and suddenly order things that I needed. Women started to put on weight during the pandemic. So the first sizes that sold out for me were my large sizes, which generally we don't carry a lot of because medium and larges are the normal size. So I didn't have enough of the larger sizes. Several times I felt that travel was going to come back, so I leaned heavily into travel wear, only for the economy to be shut down again. So inventory was a really, and continues to be a really difficult part of the business to manage, but hopefully I'm getting a little bit more skilled on it, and as we start to return to normal, even though it's a new normal, that this should become easier and easier for me to do. But so for 2.5 years and 4 lockdowns, I've really battled to keep my business going. And I really have my fingers crossed that we're coming out onto the other side of it. I do tend to be a bit of an optimist, but I'm really hoping this time my optimism is going to pay off. But make no mistake, for the apparel retail, recovery has been fragile and growth is not where it was predicted for it to be. But as a business person, I am all about growth. And when I saw that I wasn't going to be getting the kind of growth that I wanted, or the recovery growth that I wanted from my store, I started to figure out, okay, if I'm not getting growth here, where am I going to get growth? So I really did a big examination of the store and of the clientele to try to find any gaps that I may have. And I realized, we're living in a city that's surrounded by lakes and cottage country, and yet I wasn't getting that cottage traffic to the store. And despite trying to do targeted marketing to the cottagers and bring them into the store, it wasn't happening. So I thought, if people are not coming to my store, that I'm going to go out to them, and I'm going to start to look for opportunities in cottage country. And I happened to find that in Apsley. Now, Apsley's, of course, in North Kawartha. I found the area was really starting to grow, so I felt there was good opportunity there, even in terms of growth, because that area was growing as well. It was also a really easy distance for me to drive because I knew I'd be going back and forth a bit from Peterborough, and then there was also a really great building that I was going to be able to lease. So everything just seemed to fall into place in Apsley. So in May 2020, I opened my second location in Apsley. Now, of course, that was not without its challenges, because we had our grand opening on the May long weekend. And if you can all recall, that would be the weekend that the once-in-a-lifetime storm came through our area. So we were shut down on the first day of the grand opening, and then that storm, of course, really impacted business for about the next month and a half, because a lot of the cottagers were just trying to clean up their properties, understandably, and they had other priorities than visiting that really cute little store that's now open in town. But eventually that business did start to come, and I'm getting really positive feedback, and the store seems to be really well received. So I'm in a really kind of exciting spot right now as a business owner, because I have two businesses that on the surface are very, very similar, right? Women's clothing, but they're each very different. So Peterborough is a mature store that I'm working on recovering and rebuilding the business there. Apsley is a brand new store with a different clientele, and so that's all about new growth and new customer acquisitions. So it's two mindsets working on two businesses, which is for me very exciting. So I just want to wrap up today with putting together When I was at my corporate jobs, whenever we wrapped up a project, we would always do sort of a post-mortem, and we would put together our list of key learnings. So I put together a list of key learnings of what I learned of keeping a business going during a pandemic. And I realized as I put these together that these are also the things that are going to help me through our economic slowdown or a recession, whichever it is that you want to call it. I think that that these key things are going to help me there as well. So I have 4 for you. One is diversify your offering, whether it's a product, a demographic, a service. Make sure you have diversification. Our store was so heavily focused on an older female clientele that when COVID came in and basically kept that clientele from coming to the store, it really hurt the business. And when your demographic is taken away, it does take a long time to rebuild and recover. So start with that diversification from the beginning. Second, take advantage of every webinar, course, grant that you possibly can. And don't just take advantage of them, but actively seek them out. I attended so many webinars and seminars and courses, and particularly there were a lot that were put on to support businesses during COVID. And I focused a lot on the digitization of a business. And I put into practice a lot of what I learned. And my business from an operations standpoint now looks completely different than it did at the beginning of the pandemic, because I changed and I digitized everything. So front of house, back of house. So we not only have a new POS system, a new e-commerce system. I've actually changed my e-commerce site to 4 different platforms because I keep changing as I figure out what's working best for myself and my customers. But I have new payroll, new bookkeeping, new accounting software, new scheduling software. And what this has allowed me to do, because everything's cloud-based, I knew when I was doing this, is it built a really solid foundation for me so that as I started to expand, and especially opening up a second location, it didn't mean that I was tied to a software that was sitting on a computer in an office in Peterborough. I could now run a business from a laptop, so I could be anywhere. So it really allowed me to grow my business. Number 3, whatever setback your business has, whether it's a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic or a storm, don't let it define you, and don't stop setting big dreams or having big dreams, and don't let it stop you from setting really big, audacious goals. At the beginning of COVID, because everything was changing, I was kind of had a bit of a fly by the seat of my pants attitude. I had stopped doing a lot of my processes. I wasn't really goal setting because it was so hard to achieve a goal, and it became really discouraging if you'd set even a small goal and you couldn't achieve it. Because how can I set a goal when there's nobody coming in my store? And about a year and a half into COVID, I realized that I still had that COVID mindset, that I still wasn't following my good practices, I wasn't following my processes, I wasn't following my goals, and I was just using COVID almost as an excuse to be lazy and to stop certain things, because it's like, well, what's the point? It's COVID, it's going to change anywhere. But I realized that was not helping my business, and that was not making me a good leader. Even though at that point I only had 1 employee, I wasn't really being a good leader to her. So once I realized that I was kind of in this negative mindset, I was able to pull myself out. I started setting goals. Again, I started implementing my processes. And of course, by setting goals and really striving to achieve them, that's also what allowed me to have that dream of having a second location and then opening that second location. I also know in terms of leadership, I am a much stronger leader, and they can see that my sales associates see that I have a vision, that I'm working towards something, that we're working together for something. So I also became a much better leader. So don't let yourself get derailed by any setbacks that you may have. And lastly, find a way to connect with your customers in a really thoughtful way. Look at how your consumers or your customers buy from you. How do you connect from them? And understand, again, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's an economic recession, that they may not be able to support you in a way that they'd like at the moment. But if you stay connected to them at the point that they're ready, then they will come back to you. I had mentioned at the top of this talk that I spent a lot of time on my newsletter and trying to connect. And what I found over the last few years, that Dan Joyce customer who was very loyal to the store is now actually very loyal to me, and they saw how hard I was working and the things that I'm trying to do with the store. And they're so encouraging when people come into the store. It's rare that a week goes by where somebody doesn't comment on the newsletter and how much they're enjoying it, and that they appreciate the things that I'm doing, and they like hearing about other businesses. And so now what I find with that loyalty, when I try something new in the store, it's accepted. It's like, okay, let's give this a try. Let's see how that's going to work, versus, oh my God, she's trying to change our store. What's she doing? Who is this newcomer? So they're now really seeing me as the leader of the store. So that kind of ends my adventures for you today. However, seeing as anytime I start a new venture, there's some kind of once-in-a-lifetime disaster that happens. I'm sure maybe next time, next time I'll have a new set of adventures to tell you about. But that's how I've gotten through COVID today. I hope you've been able to learn something from my experiences. Thank you so much.
Nancy, obviously we know each other very well, but I have to say that during the pandemic, I went shopping at Dan Joyce's, and not only was it the best shopping experience, I got two of my favorite signature pieces, so the store doesn't have an age limit. Fantastic stuff in there, and you're not just shopping, it's an experience, and it's like a friendly experience. You just walk in and you feel like you're hanging out with friends. It was so nice.
Oh, thank you so much. That really means a lot for me to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just the next time you open up a store, if you could let us all know so we
Yeah.
can prepare anytime. Whatever's going to happen.
Yeah. I'll give you the heads up. Don't worry.
We appreciate it.
Yeah.
I find your choice absolutely very interesting. I cottage near Apsley. Apsley is not Haliburton. If you had said Haliburton, I would have been a little less surprised, but Haliburton is already saturated with stores perhaps like yours. I find Apsley to be, I like Apsley because it's the opposite of Haliburton. And I find it an interesting choice. What do you see as the future of that store and the future of Apsley, and why you fit into what it is a much smaller, more rural, more small town feel than a place like Alberta?
Honestly, that's kind of what drew me to it, because I felt the potential is there for growth, right? So you're starting off with a much smaller demographic, and like you say, much more rural. So I think the opportunities there are larger. There really wasn't any kind of like clothing store anywhere close, which also gives you the ability to draw from further around. But it was the growth in the cottagers and sort of the change in the demographic of the cottagers that were there, and the fact that cottagers were spending so much more time at their cottages. I just felt that it was a really good demographic to be able to tap into, and that there is more of that demographic there. There's also a number of people through COVID that retired up at their cottage as well, and the feedback the gut feeling I had before going in, which seems to have been proven out, is that people are really ready for things in Apsley now to happen, and they're ready to support, and they want to be able to just be able to get things in town.
Nancy, you talked about kind of being like a year and a half into the pandemic, and then all of a sudden you realized you were kind of looking at everything through this negative lens, and it was kind of this fire hose. Do you know maybe what triggered you to kind of take a step outside and be like, oh man, I've been stuck in this cycle? Kind of what was that trigger, and maybe what were the things that you did to pull yourself out of that mindset?
I think what made me realize that with this group of friends that I was talking about, we would go for walks on a Wednesday night. And I kind of found myself every time I was going to be telling, something like what's happening in the business, it was always something negative. So it was honestly just hearing myself. It's like, why am I constantly focusing on this? So it was actually just physically allowed hearing myself complaining, and I thought, this is not right, and this isn't good. And I wish I had something to say how I snapped out of it, but it was really honestly just that realization. And that I was so like one of the things that I felt was my strength going into the business, again, coming from my corporate background, I was so process driven and I so believed in process, and I had just kind of pushed it aside, and I'm like, this is not me, and it doesn't feel natural. And in fact, a couple of months ago, I had said to my sales associates, because now, of course, now I'm very much back into, again, setting the goals and getting metrics and doing small achievable things every day. And I said to my sales associates, watch out ladies, corporate Nancy is back. And we have got metrics, we have got goals, and we are going to be measuring constantly, so be aware. But they liked it, right? Because it's strong guidance, and they know where I'm going. So it literally was almost an overnight thing of hearing myself going, wow, that's not me, and then just being able to pop myself back in. There wasn't a special thing I did, it just happened.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
Great presentation, thank you. What are you most excited about going forward?
I'm most excited, honestly, it's about the growth in Apsley, and mainly trying to work out a process of how to get that store running, I don't want to say better, but growing at a faster rate, to be able to take that model and continue to use it to expand. Empire building is what I am doing, while keeping Peterborough that really strong foundation, because that will always be the mothership, and that's where all of that sort of everything stems from Peterborough. So to make sure I have the strong foundation there, but then to show this growth so that I can replicate it elsewhere.
All right.
My last question.
All right.
2 top Christmas gifts. What should we be grabbing at your store for someone?
Okay, so I have a thing for cashmere, and we brought in these cashmere toques, and we also have these cashmere 3-in-1 gloves, so they're like a hand warmer, they're a glove, or you can wear them together, because I think like gift giving, you're never going to go wrong with cashmere, right? And we all have those people that are kind of hard to buy for, so cashmere, that's my number one, that's my most favorite, that's my most favorite thing.
Good to know.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking.